Tricia Bayless has been a member here for 20 years, and she has been your finance clerk for the past 6. As she comes forward to light our chalice this morning, I invite you to rise in body or spirit to speak aloud our affirmation. If you're on Zoom, please keep muted as you speak, and the words are in your chat line. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship.
We light this chalice today with love for all mothers and mothering, past, present, and future. We celebrate those who have taken the task of nurturing. We honor our community and its generations with respect and support for the greater circle of life for which we are all a part.
Friends, the reading this morning is a responsive reading. I invite you to join me in partnering on number 573 toward the back of the gray hymnal. And so to review, this is a responsive reading. I will read the regular type. I invite you to respond with the italic type. This is a proclamation for Mother's Day by the author Julia Ward Howe. Arise then, women of this day.
Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears.
Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies.
Our husbands shall not come to us, reeking with the carnage, or caresses and applause.
Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience.
We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs.
From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm.
The sword of murder is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence vindicate possession.
As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons or ward, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel.
Let them be first, as women, to bewail and commemorate the dead.
Let them solemnly take counsel with each other as the means whereby the great human family can live in peace.
And each buried after her own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God.
By Julia Ward Howe. I've never had such a response when I've offered this reading before. Today we celebrate mothers. More broadly, we honor all who came before us, who have nurtured us. We recall the origins of Mother's Day in that responsive reading, which I will unpack more during the course of this sermon. That proclamation by Julia Ward Howe to engage in peacemaking. Is the name Julia Ward Howe familiar to you? How many of you know about her connection with Mother's Day and that proclamation that we just read? Perhaps you learned her name in connection with the tune Battle Hymn of the Republic. Many of us, maybe of a certain age, probably learned that song somewhere in our school days. I still remember the blue songbook in elementary school. Battle Hymn of the Republic was the second tune in the book. I still remember it. Howe became famous almost overnight with that text which she set to the existing tune, John Brown's Body, which was a reference to the lynching of John Brown in 1859, the abolitionist. Back then, it was common to write new words to existing tunes. At one point, I tracked 10 different texts which were set to this particular tune. Howe's poem, Battle Hymn of the Republic, was published in the Atlantic Monthly in February 1862, and it quickly became a rallying call to end the Civil War. She became a celebrity of sorts, and she used her fame to promote many social causes. And she received $5 for the verse. When you learned Battle Hymn of the Republic, how many of you also learned that Julia Ward Howe was a prominent Unitarian? Anybody? A few? I certainly didn't. I didn't know anything about Unitarians until I was well into my adulthood. But that's for another sermon topic on another day. Like many of her sister Unitarians and Universalists, Julia Ward Howe was very active in social justice in the mid-19th century, especially for peace, women's rights, and abolition. She is one of many influential women in our heritage who really changed the world they lived in. A few years ago, a new biography called The Civil Wars of Julia Ward Howe came out. It focused on the many wars she dealt with, including in her private life, which included a tumultuous marriage to a domineering husband named Samuel Howe. But still, she worked to promote peace in the wider world. It was Julia Ward Howe, who originated the idea for Mother's Day. However, the holiday she imagined in 1870 was something very different from today's Mother's Day. So I hope my sermon offers some perspective on this holiday, which you may not have known about before. That responsive reading indicated that she issued a proclamation to make Mother's Day a day of peace. The flowers and the candy and the cards today that represent our intentions to send Mom the very best, enjoyable as those presents are, came much later. Now please hear me, I'm not against flowers, I'm not against the card industry. I'm not even against serving Mom breakfast in bed, as long as she's not late for church. However, looking at the original intention of Mother's Day can broaden our perspective on this holiday and give us some new connections between Unitarian Universalists and Mother's Day. More broadly, today in Washington, our capital, and in other places in this country, Americans could use many more people like Julia Ward Howe as advocates for peace. Peace in this country, peace in the wider world. Julia Ward Howe's life illustrates how 19th century women of liberal faith and justice were willing to take risks to change the world. As we hear the story of how she created Mother's Day, I encourage you to think on the lives of other brave, radical, gutsy women who helped pave the way for you. And consider what their bravery means in your life today. These might not be biological mothers. Perhaps these are women who have mothered you, men who have nurtured you, humans of all genders who have cared about you. Some of us may recall persons from whom we today are separated through distance, or perhaps broken relationships, or perhaps even death. But still, our memories and our connections are important to recall today. Julia Ward Howe was born in 1819 in New York City. She came from privilege. Her father was a banker, but wealth was not the necessary condition for her call to social advocacy, nor did it make her life any easier. Her mother died when Julia was 5, which may partially explain her Mother's Day proclamation to remember mothers. I've never seen anything in writing about that, but that seems like a logical connection. Her father raised her by strict Calvinist standards. But then, as an adult living in Boston, she learned about liberal religion from the likes of William Ellery Channing and Ralph Waldo Emerson. She knew them directly. She was well schooled. She became a recognized author. In 1843, she married Samuel Gridley Howe, who was a teacher at the Perkins Institute for the Blind in what is today the town of Watertown, Watertown, Massachusetts. The Perkins School continues to be in existence today. It's a prominent institution for teaching of blind and deaf children. The Howes had 5 children during a tumultuous marriage. Julia did not consider divorce because she knew she would lose access to her children. 19th century divorce laws strongly favored men. But the Howes did work together productively in abolition work. And she saw firsthand the devastation of war, not only on the battlefield, but long after the fighting was over. The Civil War ended in 1865. When she was visiting a battlefield near Washington, D.C., that's when she heard John Brown's Body tune being sung, and that inspired her to write the new words that were published in 1862. Like many other women's rights advocates, she saw parallels between freedom for blacks, of course, one of the causes of the Civil War, and freedom for women. She said that through working for women's rights, she found a new sense of her own voice as an advocate for all types of rights, all types of social reform. Then, through her fame as the author of Battle Hymn of the Republic, she became a popular public speaker as well. So by 1865, the Civil War had ended, leaving behind the effects of the bloodiest confrontation this country has ever known, although not as long as an American presence in Afghanistan, which is, by my reckoning, is the longest war we've ever engaged in. But then Howe learned about the growing likelihood of a Franco-Prussian war in Europe, a return to barbarism, as she called it. She was certain another war could be avoided, if only humans could set their mind to it. She decided to become a one-woman crusade for peace, and in 1870, she issued that proclamation we just read. She called on mothers everywhere, in her view, the most likely audience to support peace, to persuade their husbands and sons to put down their arms. Yes, warfare was quite gendered in the 19th century. It made sense for her to appeal to women and mothers. As late as 1870, American culture was stratified by gender. One of the several prevailing social conventions was called separate spheres for men and women. There were very clear distinctions for the appropriate sphere to live in, and war was particularly gendered. Women's sphere was in the home. Women were givers and nurturers of life and the source of mortality for the family. Men did the fighting. So her proclamation of 1870 led to the first observance of Peace Day on June 2nd, 1871. Then she went to London to promote the observance internationally, but with not much success. In many ways, the upstart Americans, fresh from the Civil War, were pulling way ahead of the Brits in women's advocacy. In the United States, recognition of the holiday continued to increase. Every year until her death in 1910, Mother's Peace Day was celebrated on the second Sunday in June. Unfortunately, Howe was never able to have the day recognized as an official American holiday. But then in 1914, during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, another feminist activist named Anna Jarvis convinced Congress to pass a Mother's Day resolution. As far back as the 1850s, Jarvis's mother, Anna Reeves Jarvis, had worked for better sanitary conditions in her home state of West Virginia. And you may recall the forerunner of what became the Red Cross was known as the Sanitary Commission during the Civil War. So her mother worked for the Sanitary Commission. Anna Jarvis continued her mother's activism. She persuaded Congress to declare the second Sunday of May the national holiday of Mother's Day, which is what we're on now. Alas, fairly soon the day was commercialized. It was said that Anna Jarvis herself was incensed with how the original intentions to promote peace were all but forgotten. In 1938, for example, Elizabeth Roosevelt declared that Mother's Day flowers were sweet. But she said that a much better way to honor mothers would be to see something done about the 14,000 women who died in childbirth every year. It wasn't only a feminist calling that inspired Julia Ward Howe. Although not a minister herself, she preached frequently in Unitarian churches, and she inspired many other Unitarian and Universalist women to engage in radical work to change lives. People like Margaret Fuller, or Mary Livermore, or Olympia Brown, or Lucy Stone, or the woman who's the subject of my research, Lydia Jenkins. In the 1870s, Julia Ward Howe founded the Free Religious Association, which was a group that promoted ecumenical interfaith religious connections. And I'm currently researching another interfaith group of women that Julia founded called the Women's Ministerial Conference. She was really active in trying to bring people together through organizations. She died at the age of 91. 4,000 people attended her funeral in Boston. Julia's Unitarian faith gave her the courage to call women to engage beyond the domestic sphere, to support all humanity all around the world, not only in the domestic sphere. She understood the responsibility we all share to teach our children how to practice love in a world in which war is a very real possibility. She also knew how much our children can teach us about the true spirit of Mother's Day. Her call for peace indeed changed the world. As a Unitarian, Julia Howe was in good company. Many other Unitarians and Universalists across the decades have been engaged in peacemaking. For example, in 2010, peacemaking was the focus of the Statement of Conscience adopted by the UUA General Assembly. That statement opened with these words: "We believe all people share a moral responsibility to create peace. Mindful of both our rich heritage and our past failures to prevent war, and enriched by our present diversity of experience and perspective, we commit ourselves to a radically inclusive and transformative approach to peace," unquote. That statement of conscience generated many materials about peace, which are still available, possibilities for book discussion groups or adult education classes, which at some point you may want to follow up on. We've been committed to peacemaking for a long time. Echoing today's call to worship, peace resides in many layers of life. Peace in the world depends on peace in individual nations, led by peace in our cities, peace in our neighborhoods, our homes, and in ourselves. There's many different meanings for peace, even among us who share common religious values. For most of us to tackle world peace single-handedly is a bit overwhelming. So instead, let's focus on a more manageable layer of peace. For a few moments, let's consider peace within ourselves. What does inner peace look like and feel like for you? How do you know when you have peace in your heart? How do you describe it? How do you feel when you are peaceful? I expect most of us would say that inner peace is that feeling of being settled, or feeling mindful, or feeling reflective. Peace includes a sense of unity within ourselves. Our own parts aren't at warfare with one another. Personal peace, a sense of personal fulfillment, perhaps, which we want to share with others, so that our heart's peace can generate peace within our families, our communities, our cities, and so on. I'm certain that each of us has known such peace, perhaps frequently. Perhaps right now you are in a place of peace this morning. And I am also certain that no one's life is always peaceful. Perhaps one of the reasons we choose to come to church. How might you grow any peace that resides in your heart? How can you pick up tips for finding peace from people around you? Does association with children who represent future hope and joy bring you peace? This year, I've often called on you to engage in regular personal habits of spiritual practice. Daily practice of mindfulness and calming does much to restore peace, especially when it eludes our grasp in our personal lives, in this congregation, in the world. When we find our own peace, we become open to sharing peace with others. Of course, peace resides at many levels, in many places. What will you do to promote peace on this day honoring mothers? You might want to go for something monumental. Peace in the world might not be a bad endeavor, as Julia Ward Howe did. Perhaps the peace you create is a bit smaller, but no less important. If you start with expanding peace in your heart, think how you can spill out into relations with others, with someone you know, maybe to mothers, maybe to someone else in your family, or your workplace, or school, or this congregation. Call these people. Visit them. Let them know you appreciate them. Pass on to them the peace you summon from your own heart. It's somewhat regrettable that we humans must still work so hard at peace, but it's not a cause without hope. My inner universalist grounds me in hope and calls me to keep on keeping on, just as my 19th century sisters like Julia Ward Howe did. Peace is never a sure thing. Peace can feel elusive in this world, in our families, in our hearts, in this congregation. But that does not mean that we should not keep working at it, this stuff of peacemaking. So, my friends, may all our hopes for peace come true. May we all know peace. May all this be so.